Hey Enneagram friends, this is Abby, an IEA accredited Enneagram coach and certified somatic experiencing practitioner. In today's episode, I want to share with you some of the common reasons that each of the Enneagram types come to coaching. You know, there are some common things that are going to be consistent across all of the types, like wanting to pursue better relationships, wanting some space to process how to better parent, some curiosities around faith and spirituality. But outside of some of those common reasons, there are some things that are pretty consistent in each Enneagram type as to what draws them into coaching. I want to share these with you because sometimes it can be a little bit confusing as to who is coaching for and why would I pursue that. And so as you listen to the reasons for your type, I want you to be curious and consider if those land in your experience and how you might need some support in this season. For people that are first coming to coaching and they're a little bit unsure about what they want to focus on, what the intent is for coaching in this season, sometimes I'll offer this practice of, imagine if you could wave a magic wand and change or adjust or fix any part of your experience to make it better, to make it more joyful, to make it feel healthier or more whole. What would that be? Sometimes it's a relationship. Sometimes it's a very specific piece of that relationship. Sometimes it has to do with your vocation and the work that you do. Sometimes it has to do with other relationships like your mother-in-law or parenting your children. And so I want to invite you just to take a moment. If you waved a magic wand and you could adjust anything in your world, what would it be? So as we come into this episode, I want to talk through some of the type-specific reasons that each of the Enneagram types are drawn into the coaching space with me and see what resonates in your experience. As you listen and something lands and there's this new awareness that you need some support in that, I would love for you to reach out to explore coaching. We can schedule a free 15-minute call to connect for you to get a chance to get to know my work and the way that I show up in that coaching space, but also to get some support in what you want to explore in this season. If you want to skip ahead to your type, no judgment here. I will put in the show notes the timestamp for each of the 9 types as I go through in case you want to jump right to yours. Starting off with our type 1s, here are some common reasons that type 1s come into the coaching space. The first is that the inner critic is exhausting, and 1s can get to this space where they just can't stand it anymore. Stand this feeling of waking up and feeling like you've done something wrong before your feet even hit the floor, or having consistent moments in life where you feel like you're not good enough. And as 1s bring some more awareness to the inner critic and are able to name its presence in that experience, they can get to this really frustrated space of, I hear the inner critic, but now what do I do about it? And coaching can be a really helpful space to peel back some of the layers and to implement some really helpful somatic practices to balance out the reactivity of your inner critic and kind of separate yourself from the inner critic. Another aspect that commonly draws 1 into the coaching space is that they're tired and there's really just this deep longing to be free of the mounting responsibilities that just keep piling on, whether that's at work, whether that's in your home environment with children or the spaces that you volunteer with aging parents, just this overwhelming feeling of being tired because there's so much that you're responsible for and you have a lot of plates that you're continuing to keep spinning. And in that, once when they become aware of it, that awareness isn't good enough. They don't know how to get out of it. And so coaching can be a really helpful space to dissipate some of the anxiety around that responsibility, to align what is a fair and realistic expectation and what can maybe fall to the wayside based off of your values and priorities, but to also have some implemented acts of self-care and balance and rejuvenation that are essential to balancing out the responsibility. And the last aspect that I'll mention for type 1s that commonly draws type 1s into the coaching space and pursuing coaching with me is just this overarching feeling of being dissatisfied because your personal feelings and preferences and needs have been pushed aside for years now. And so usually there's some sense of reckoning, of realizing I have shoved down these feelings for so long, and now they're bubbling up to the surface and I don't know what to do with them. Or so much of my time and energy is given to keeping this machine of my life running, and I'm tired, and I want to spend time doing things that bring me joy and satisfaction and fulfillment, but I don't know how to do that. And so having some space to process that emotion, having some helpful resources to actually experience what's going on, whether those are the more tender, uncomfortable emotions, or even just having some space to understand what you care about and what you value in your life, so that you can begin to move forward in a way that's more joyful and more fulfilled, with moving kind of out of this sense of just, of just surviving and living from day to day, putting your head down to get through, but transitioning into this sense of freedom and really thriving and enjoying your life rather than just getting through it. For type 2s, here are some general coaching intentions that bring type 2s into the coaching space with me. The first is that there is some aspect of a relationship that you're dissatisfied with or you're discouraged with, whether that is someone significant in your life, like your spouse, or with your children, maybe someone that you've, a mother-in-law, your mom, someone that you've a part of your extended family, or it could even be in a professional sense, someone that you supervise or your boss, just this sense of feeling really discouraged with a relationship and needing some space to process that, but also some advice on how to better navigate that, especially if you know their Enneagram type and want to have some more wisdom around how to interact and approach and communicate well with that person, because they're part of your life and they're not going anywhere. Another aspect that often draws type 2s into the coaching space is this overwhelming feeling of exhaustion from giving and helping and extending out towards others in this intention of creating a meaningful connection. And it can leave you feeling depleted and burnt out and just simply exhausted, especially if those feelings and actions and care, if it's not reciprocated, if there's not a mutually beneficial relationship, but it feels like a lot of one-sided relationships. And so this feeling of exhaustion and an awareness that you can't keep going on that way, that you can't keep going on waking up tired or separating yourself from others because you're exhausted before you even start the day, before you even try to engage. And so that feeling of exhaustion can bring type 2s into the coaching space to help process through and incorporate some self-care habits and rhythms so that they are rejuvenated and cared for and not always extending outwards towards others. Another aspect that commonly brings type 2s into the coaching space is this feeling of dissatisfaction because you've pushed aside your personal feelings and your wants and your needs for so much time now that you kind of hit this wall and you realize that you're not satisfied, but also that you need some better self-care practices and often better boundaries. Oftentimes this feeling of being dissatisfied and this pushing aside of your personal feelings and wants is usually in tandem with a relationship where the lines have gotten blurred, the boundaries are not set. There's not a well-differentiated sense of where you stop and the next person begins. And because of that, you need some better boundaries. You need some better practices that are still representative of how you show up in a relationship and the warmth and care and nurturing presence that you occupy, but also still a boundary there so that you don't lose yourself in that, but also so that you don't find yourself in relationships where others are controlling you or controlling your happiness or overextending themselves into your space, and you're inadvertently overextending yourself into other space. And so having some ability to establish some better boundaries is another reason that type 2s are often drawn into that coaching space. For type 3s, an aspect that commonly brings type 3s into the coaching space is this feeling or feelings around overwhelm and burnout. It's almost a sense that there's continuous demands on them for their work and the roles that they play, the spaces that they volunteer, or whatever it might be, these commitments. And they're just going and doing and achieving and accomplishing. And there ends up being this moment of realizing I'm completely exhausted. Maybe they've moved into that 9 stress point and they're apathetic and on the couch and can't motivate themselves to do anything more. Or maybe there's a more subtle inclination of it, but there's a sense of I'm overwhelmed and burned out, and I have no idea what to do next. I have no way of getting out of this. I can't just quit my job. I can't just quit being a mom. I can't just quit whatever it is. And so needing some practices to balance out some of the responsibility, to minimize some of the shame around not meeting expectations, whether those are external expectations or things that you believe you should be able to do, you should be able to accomplish, you should excel at. And so having some ability to both balance out that shame response of being hard on yourself, while also incorporating some self-care and some rhythms that are actually rejuvenating. Not just this painful slowness that can cause that kind of melancholy response for the type 3s, but an intentional choice of slowness and rejuvenation and play and leisure as part of the rhythms, in addition to everything that you're accomplishing. Another aspect for type 3s that often brings them into the coaching space with me is this feeling of just overall dissatisfaction in life or in specific areas of life. And it's almost the sense that no amount of effort or strategizing or goal setting can get them out of the situation. There's nothing they can do to pep talk them into being motivated. They just are disenchanted and they need some support in that. They don't know how to get out of that space. And the last thing that I'll mention for type 3s is this feeling of sadness that can often come as the result of loss or transition or maybe even failure. But sometimes failure is too big of a word for some of these smaller moments. But it's this season of grief that the type 3 has now found themselves in. And often they're very withdrawn or again, maybe very dispassionate. And they feel like they've become a new person that they don't like. And it's not that they've become a new person. They've really are just in this new season, but they don't know how to move forward. They don't know how to find themselves again. They don't know how to right size expectations of how they will move forward. And again, there's just this feeling of feeling lost in this season of grief and needing some help to find their way out of this transition into something new, something that's hopeful and joyful on the horizon. For type 4s, some common things that bring type 4s into the coaching space with me. The first is this sense of feeling discouraged about the current situation. So maybe that is the place that you now live, the new job that you occupy, the relationship that you're in. And you get to this point where it's hard to shake the feeling that you're ill-equipped for it, that you don't know how to make the relationship work, that you don't know how to make this, working relationship work, right? With the people that you supervise or with your boss that feels really confusing to interact with. Almost a sense of being ill-equipped for whatever that situation is, the work, the relationship, the community. And it's things that you desire, but that feeling of inferiority and that feeling of not knowing how to do it can create this sense of dissatisfaction and discouragement around, should I even be here? Is this relationship even working? Is this really the job that I want to have? And so in that space, needing some support to process through and to make your way out of that feeling of discouragement. Another aspect for type 4s that often draws them into the coaching space is this feeling of frustration with how their current context doesn't measure up with how they want things to be, whether that is the communities that they participate in, their faith and the faith communities that they participate in, their work, their vocation, this calling that they feel in their life, and also relationships, whether that is what they thought parenting would be like, what they thought marriage and a committed relationship would be like, this frustration around the current context and it not meeting the ideal. And the last aspect that often brings 4s into the coaching space is just this feeling of being tired around the emotional highs and lows that can come with being more emotionally attuned to your experience. One of the gifts of type 4s is that they have a keen awareness of how they are feeling in any given moment. But that can, when it's in excess and that introspection is a consistent or a excessive part of your experience, it can feel really overwhelming, and it can feel like, it can feel exhausting to ride the highs and lows of your experience. It can feel really tiring to have to get yourself in the mood to do ordinary things or get yourself in the mood to participate in everyday life. And so often 4s get to this space where they're just tired and they don't know how to have better rhythms, or they feel very overwhelmed by the idea of having to have rhythms. And so they don't know where to start. They need some better self-care practices, but they also need some space to sort through what is true in their experience, because they still want to show up authentically, but they want to show up as the best version of themselves, and the current version is exhausting. And so having some better rhythms for self-care practices and routines so that they can care for themselves, but also show up as the best authentic version of themselves. For type 5s, one of the common concerns that draws type 5s into the coaching space is this feeling of really just feeling lost for how to solve a problem with a significant relationship. So with your spouse, with your kids, with maybe, a dear friend. And it's the sense of knowing how to connect with them on an emotional level. So that could be feeling like they are overly emotional. Maybe it's a young child that feels like they're having very big and dramatic emotions, and this confusion that type 5 parents will feel on how to connect with them, especially when the child's really dysregulated. Or maybe it's with a partner and they're wanting more from you. They want to know how you feel and they want to connect with you on an emotional level. And it can just feel like you're not equipped for that. You don't know exactly how to show up in that space, even though you love and desire and want to be in deep connection with them. Another aspect that will show up often as a concern that draws type 5s into the coaching space is just this feeling of exhaustion with the demands on your energy and the demands on your time. Maybe you are a parent and you have kids that are constantly wanting your time and attention. They're constantly depending on you and wanting that space with you, or needing that space because they're really little. But whatever it might be, this feeling of overwhelm, but a desire to be present and wanting to show up well in those spaces. And with that though, still knowing that you need to recharge. And so trying to figure out, how do I balance being present in relationships, the demands on my time and energy, but also showing up in a way that honors who I am and what I care about, and that I value this relationship, while also valuing the other person that needs my time and energy and attention. So having some practices and some strategies to be able to withdraw and recharge, while also still being connected to others and respecting their needs in their relationship as well. And the last common concern that I'll mention for type 5s that draws them into the coaching space is kind of these bigger emotions of feeling really afraid or feeling really angry. And it's kind of this overwhelming dysregulation and these emotions coming up. And you don't want to feel that way. You don't want to live in that state, but you're not sure how to process that emotion in order to move through and past it. It's almost as a result, these emotions kind of get compartmentalized, or they become an intellectual problem rather than an emotion. And that over time just causes you to get more and more stuck when you are trying to fix your emotion rather than having some strategies to metabolize that emotion, to allow it to come, to be, and then to go in the way that it was intended. And so that's another common reason that draws type 5s in the coaching space, needing some strategies to move out of fixing emotion into experiencing and metabolizing and processing emotion so that it can go in the way that it was meant to. For type 6s, here are some common concerns that draw 6s into the coaching space with me. The first is that constant awareness of threats and pitfalls and concerns. It just creates this feeling of exhaustion for type 6s. But even in an awareness of what's creating that exhaustion, 6s often don't know how to turn down the volume on that, how to stop seeing those things. How do you, even if you're aware of the hypervigilance that's part of the type 6 structure, how do you turn that down so that it's not so consuming for you? And so when that becomes what feels like out of control for the type 6s, there's this desire to balance that out, and often the support that they need can be found in that coaching space with me. Another aspect for type 6s that draws them into the coaching space is this desire for support in a discernment process. As you're trying to figure out what's next, or to have some clarity in the decision-making process, wanting to have some sense of, in some ways, affirmation around the thought process and the truths that you already know to be true, but just needing a space to process that. And then the last thing that I'll mention for type 6s that draws them into the coaching space is this aspect of feeling stuck around your current situation as it revolves around your dedication. So your commitment to an organization, your commitment to an institution, maybe even your commitment to people. Sometimes for type 6s, they can find themselves in relationships where the relationship has really expired, but the type 6 has kind of remained in the relationship past the expiration date. And so sometimes there's a lot of confusion around, how do I navigate these relationships? How do I pull away from this commitment and this loyalty to people that are not life-giving, or they're actually overtly hurtful to me? It's not a mutually beneficial friendship. It's very one-sided. And so having some space and some support and language around having boundaries and being able to separate, but still remain true to who you are in a way that honors who you are and how you want to show up in the world. And so all along the way, having practices to balance out some of the internal criticism that you might feel in those moments when you become aware that a relationship is unhealthy and maybe needs some support, whether that is better boundaries or some space, and being able to affirm what you actually know to be true and step forward in that with confidence. For type 7s, one of the common concerns that bring them into the coaching space is often this season that they newly experience of grief, of hurt, of sadness. The type 7 structure is so skilled at avoiding pain, of rationalizing painful things before they really land, and kind of seeing the silver lining and seeing the glass half full rather than half empty. And although that can be a skill set when it's in balance, what can happen for type 7s is that a lifetime of rosy colored glasses and a lifetime of finding the silver lining, when there is a moment that the pain is too much to cover it over, or the hurt is too deep to find the silver lining and just get past it, it's almost like this tidal wave of hurt and pain and sadness and disappointment hits the type 7, and there's this reckoning. They have to figure out what to do with it. And so healthy 7s in that season will reach out for support. If you are not in a good headspace, often what will happen for 7s is that they will indulge in things in order to get through or past it. So for 7s that are aware that this is happening and they need some support, this is often one of the things that brings them into the coaching space with me, needing some guidance on how do I manage this? Even for 7s, if they know they are supposed to feel this way, it's normal to feel this way because their parent just passed away or they just lost their job, something really hard just happened, it can often feel like they need a guide in order to manage and to find the way through this season of sadness. And coaching is a really helpful space to have that support, to learn practices to process and actually metabolize that emotion so that it can come, be experienced, and then go in the way that it was intended to. But we need a guide along the way because for type 7s, that type 7 structure is really sneaky at avoiding pain for you, often before you even realize you're experiencing it. And so needing a guide to walk through that season of grief in a way that's faithful, not just pushing it further below the surface, but actually interacting with and naming their experience so that they can move through in a way that's healthy and balanced. Another aspect for type 7s that brings them into the coaching space is just this feeling of discouragement around the current situation not being what you wanted it to be. Feeling stuck in a dead-end job where you can't move into other things, or maybe you have a supervisor that's really constricting and limiting on your ability to be creative or to have some variety in the way that you show up in your work. Maybe you're feeling stuck in the roles that you occupy, not that you want to get out of or get rid of those roles, but it's a lot of responsibility to be a parent, and there's a lot of that's expected of you being a leader, or there's a lot of natural responsibilities and pieces that are a part of being in a committed relationship or sharing a household. And so feeling discouraged about that situation, feeling stuck in the situation, again, not because you want to get out of it, but because you're aware of the fact that you don't want to, and you need to find a way to balance out some of that frustration and that discouragement in order to find joy, genuine joy, not artificial hyping up the situation, but genuine joy in the midst of the discouragement, in the midst of disappointing moments, in the midst of responsibility. The last thing that I'll mention for our type 7s that often brings them into the coaching space is kind of this concern around feeling restless. For type 7s, often there's this, just below the surface anxiousness or worry or concern that really gets drowned out by the imagination and the optimism and the orientation towards possibility. But in these moments, you will realize that you're really scattered in something, or you're really distracted in something, and you don't feel the full depth of the relationship or the full depth of the commitment because you're distracted and scattered. And over time, it creates this restlessness for the type 7s, but it also creates this exhaustion. It's almost like this buzzing around from thing to thing to thing. And at the end of the day, you're just tired. And so in a season of that, or there's some kind of reckoning and you realize this, you need some support and some guidance on how do we acknowledge and move our way through this in a way that's honoring of who you are, in a way that's much more rejuvenated and balanced and restful than your current experience. For my fellow type 8s out there, here are some common concerns that often draw type 8s into the coaching space with me. The first is just feeling exhausted and overwhelmed by the fast-paced nature and increasing demands on you, on your time and energy and attention and all of the things that you need to get done, and the intensity and passion that you have that propels some of that. Having some space to process through, how do I, dial it back? How do I find some more balance? How do I actually take care of myself? Because often these roles and responsibilities, they're not things you can just leave or quit. You can't just quit being a parent. You might not be able to just quit your job. And so having some space to process through the emotion that's showing up for you, and also to incorporate some practices and realign how you want to move through the world in a way that's not just running and running and running until you finally hit the wall and come crashing down. Another concern that often brings type 8s into the coaching space is feeling really discouraged in an intimate relationship where you don't know how to make progress forward. As you learn more about the type 8 structure, you know that vulnerability is a challenging aspect for you, and you know that part of intimate relationships is vulnerability, but knowing that doesn't mean you can just do that. And so you need some support and some guidance around how to start taking practical steps towards vulnerability, and also feeling safe in that process so that you don't become completely flooded in that experience. The last aspect that I'll mention for type 8s that commonly draws them into the coaching space with me is really just feeling tired for always being the strong one, always being the one that is protecting everyone, including yourself. Having this deep desire for rest and this ability just to put down the armor so you're not constantly fighting, or you're not constantly the tough one, you're not constantly leading the march. But it feels impossible to do that. And so having guidance and support around the type 8 structure in this area, as it shows up in your specific context, so that you can begin to pull back and balance out some of these tendencies, and also process the emotion that's happening for you. Often that feeling is really accompanied by this reciprocal feeling of big anger, and then quiet moments of feeling afraid, or big anger and quiet moments of feeling insecure and ashamed. And so processing through that experience so that you are not just shouldering the responsibility and shouldering everything that's expected, but you have the ability to rest too, and not feel like the world will come crashing down if you take a moment to pause and recover. And finally, our type 9s. Here are some common concerns that often draw type 9s into the coaching space with me. The first is feeling stuck in your job, feeling stuck in the routines that are a part of your everyday life, maybe feeling stuck in certain relationships, or maybe a relationship that you're committed to. It just feels like it's in a rut. And you're aware of that, but you don't know what to do about it. It's almost this sense of, I can see it now. I'm not numb to it or asleep to it, but now what do? I don't know how to get out of this or make my way through this in a way that is any better than what is currently happening. And so really needing some guidance on how to have some agency to move through that relationship or that situation or job. Another aspect that commonly draws type 9s into the coaching space is this feeling of feeling tired of the tension and conflict in their experience. So maybe that's in certain relationships, but they have this habit of avoiding or minimizing it. And as they learn more about the Enneagram, they often become aware of this habit. And now that the light has shone brightly on this habit of avoiding, they realize people are overextending themselves into their space. They're walking over them. They're trying to control them as the type 9. And again, just because you can see it doesn't mean you necessarily know what to do about it. And so having some support and some guidance to process through that experience, and to interact with others with kindness, with love, but with more agency and feeling confident in the way that you speak to others, and in that relationship, setting boundaries or pushing back, whatever it might be. And then the last thing that I'll mention for type 9s as a common concerns that draws them into the coaching space is sometimes there's these seasons when the type 9 moves into their stress point or they're experiencing a lot of stress, that they feel this quiet anxiety and they're not sure what to do about it. Often type 9s being overly worried or overly concerned or hypervigilant, just not a typical part of their experience. And so when they feel really anxious, when they feel really worried, it becomes this quiet experience that they hold internally because they don't even know how to articulate it or how to talk through that, but it's exhausting for them. And that anxiety can feel just overwhelming and rob joy from their experience, cause them to lose sleep, cause them to have these really knee-jerk reactions to others when they're feeling really flooded or in just this reactionary state. And so 9s needing some support to move out of that into more wholeness and goodness and true joy rather than just surviving. We made it all the way around the circle to each of the 9 types, looking at some of the common reasons that each type comes in to coaching with me. I hope that as we went through your type, you're able to take a curious look at your experience. If those aspects resonate with you as you wave your magic wand to change or alter or fluctuate any part of your experience, what came up for you? And did some of these coaching intentions that I listed for your type resonate? If they did, I hope that you will reach out to get some support. We all need support along the way. We were not meant to do this alone. And sometimes we need specialized support by a coach that's trained to walk through that experience to help you process your emotions that are coming up in that, to have strategies to move forward in a way that's more balanced and life-giving based on your Enneagram type. And so reach out, schedule a free call, explore coaching, listen to the other coaching episodes if this is new to you, because the reality is you have one precious life. So my hope is that you are not surviving it, but you are thriving in it. Okay, friends, till next time. Are you interested in coaching but need a more cost-effective option to participate? I hope you'll join the next group coaching cohort that begins at the end of January. Group coaching provides participants with the opportunity to delve deeper into the Enneagram and also to have personal support from me as an accredited Enneagram coach and certified somatic experiencing practitioner. Each group coaching is limited to 5 participants so that you not only have space to learn from the teaching moments, but to also process your experience and receive coaching in a safe and supportive environment. This group coaching cohort that's beginning at the end of January is specifically designated for women this time around. This group coaching will begin January 26th and meet weekly on Wednesday evenings at 6:30 or 7:30 if you're on the Eastern time zone. It'll meet over Zoom throughout the course of 2 months for 8 total sessions. Each session will include an opening mindfulness practice, Enneagram teaching moments, personal sharing, as well as coaches' responses throughout. The registration is only $320 for the 8 group coaching sessions, which is a fraction of the cost for individual coaching that I offer. Each group, again, is limited to 5 participants, so make sure that you reserve your spot and register today.